IT, math, also legal, accounting, HR, communications, and those less likely to be affected, things that need more in-person presence. So like nurses, childcare, beauty, drivers. So we like to think about this as sort of a companion. If you think about 50% of your skills being done by AI, it could be pretty productivity enhancing. It could be a great thing. That said, there likely are jobs that will be totally changed or may go away because of AI. We know that. So I think, one of the things that we say often is the mix of jobs, it's definitely going to change. The workforce is definitely going to change because of AI. And so no matter where any of us are in our career journeys, we're going to have to keep learning new skills, and change can be scary, can be daunting, but it also means we can learn new ways of working. And hopefully, as our work evolves, it will end up being more fulfilling work that increasingly work that only humans can do. And obviously, when it comes to learning new skills, Harvard has a lot to offer. I think the last thing I would add here is in terms of interest that we see about AI on Indeed, total jobs mentioning AI have been relatively flat year to date, actually, but that's in part because jobs for technology roles and math roles in particular are down year to date. Jobs mentioning generative AI are actually up 20x year to date, and searches for jobs for generative AI are up 40x. So there's a ton of interest, albeit from a very low base. These jobs are still less than 1% of all jobs on Indeed, but hopefully it gives some context on the trajectory.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned there that I think is an important point for people to remember too is that while this is certainly, as you said, I think, and I agree, one of the most important innovations since the internet itself, history is replete with examples of new technologies where people are convinced it's going to ruin the job market. And in every case, what's happened is it shifts it and grows it in ways that we just can't anticipate. And I suspect that'll be true in AI too. And it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you would agree with that statement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So with that context, what do you think will be the most sought after skills that job seekers can develop if they're going to thrive in an age when AI will become more relevant?
Yeah, so if we believe AI will change how we find jobs and how we work, and actually that, per our research, it actually may be better at some of the technical skills than humans are. So we see that coming, but we also know that there's always going to be a need for skills that are uniquely human. So what are those? Creative thinking, analytical judgment, communication, emotional intelligence, negotiation, leadership, even, detecting bias, which is so important for us to be aware of as we think about the use of AI. And, investing in developing these skills is really important because these skills are very transferable across roles and industries. And we actually see employers placing increasing emphasis on looking for these uniquely human skills. So I think that's the first really important point to keep in mind. And I think that's, it bodes well for people, right? That's so important. Now, in the age of AI, for many roles, I think it's also important that you invest in building, tech literacy. So I would say it's important to learn about the basics of AI, including, again, like how to keep an eye out for some of the bias that comes with it. And if you want to work in a more analytical role, or you already work in an analytical role, I think the last thing I would say that's very specific here is if you could pick one skill, I would say learn Python. It's the leading language in machine learning in many fields, and that's a very specific one that I think most people will find very helpful.
And ironically, it's something, Python programming is something that a lot of these models can do pretty well, but they still need a human to give the prompts and the input to get the end product right. I couldn't agree with you more, and I wrote a column in this regularly for Forbes, and one of the ones that I wrote recently was about how a lot of the fundamentals are still true. You mentioned EQ and leadership, and I've always argued that the two of those combined are the most powerful skills somebody can have, no matter the context. And fortunately for us, those are two things that I think AI, at least in the foreseeable future, and I actually think probably forever, is never gonna be as good as a human at embodying when it comes to both personal and professional lives for us. So let's talk about creative ways for people to upskill themselves. Again, in light of all the things we've talked about thus far, thoughts around that?
Yeah. Okay, so first, when it comes to just getting familiarity with generative AI, play with it. If you're not playing with it, that's a great way to start. I'll give an example. So at Indeed, we had an offsite with leaders from all functions. And as part of the offsite, we actually asked them all to use ChatGPT to ask questions about how it could change the way they do their jobs today. And every single function came back with a long list of ideas of things that it could do right now. The free version that would help make their work easier, faster, better. We look a lot at hiring at Indeed. We see this happening already in hiring. Almost 90% of talent acquisition leaders are using AI to help them in some parts of their process. So, just in pockets internally and with our employer clients, we see this a lot. I would also say if you are a person who's looking to upskill or transition into a new role or industry, and you're thinking about maybe not just AI in particular, but those other skills, there are a lot of ways you can get some experience in that area. And it's not always by taking a full-time job in that area. For example, if you're in a company, you're thinking about changing from some function to another function, see if you can get exposure to that via a project within your company, for example. Networking or even online communities are great options too for getting a sense of a different industry and learning a little bit more about it. When it comes to taking classes, my goodness, there have never, ever been more options and more flexible options than are available right now, no matter what you're looking for, like really informal learning, 5 minutes, 3 days, weeks, it's all available. You need to do it at night. There's an option for you. So I think just if you haven't gone out and explored what's available now in terms of learning, it's incredible, actually. And then I think the last thing I would say here is, once you develop a new skill, make sure that skill is actually visible to employers. And unfortunately, our traditional sort of linear resumes aren't great at this. But many online, platforms like Indeed are offering ways to showcase skills that you may have gained in non-traditional ways. And that's really important to telling the whole story of, who you are and what you can do.
Yeah, it does no good to get the skills and not be able to demonstrate that you have them. And to your point about education opportunities, obviously that's what we're all about here at Harvard Business School Online. And I have to admit that when I joined the organizations many years ago, coming up on 8 years ago or so, to help grow the online portfolio, there was still some skepticism about whether asynchronous online learning could get the job done. And in many cases it can, not in all cases. It depends on what you're looking to do, but there are, as you say, tons of opportunities, almost making it no excuse to not get some upskilling done, because there's everything from free to paid to business to poetry. So the world is your oyster. What are some of the methods job seekers can use to identify areas to upskill in? You talked about some of it in actually even asking AI, hey, here's my job, here's my role, what sort of skills could I need? Any other ideas beyond that?
Yeah, so if we think about those transferable human soft skills that we talked about earlier, there's actually a number of ways you can identify, do you need to improve in one of them? I don't know, creative thinking or communication or negotiation. You can take assessments for that. Harvard offers some, I'm sure. And asking for feedback from your peers, if you're in a working environment right now, is another great way to get feedback on, okay, which of these things might be areas that I could focus on or improve. If we think about specific skills that are for particular roles or industries, you can also go look at patterns in job descriptions. So for example, on Indeed, alongside salary benchmarks that we show, we oftentimes can show skills that are highly in demand. I'll give one specific example. We were just looking last week. If you were looking to become a marketing manager, Pardot and Marketo are two skills right now that are trending upward and actually bring in more pay. So you can also make the connection between skills that seem to be growth skills in an industry or job category, and are they associated with more pay in that sector? And then lastly, if you think about, networking or joining an online community of professionals, what skills should I learn is a really easy question to ask. Fishbowl, we have a sister company, Fishbowl, which is part of Glassdoor, has a lot of active professional communities. And on that, Women in Tech is one that I like to engage with. And there's a lot of cool threads there on, well, what skills should you build and how do you think about this particular type of career? So those are just some easy ways to think about, getting more intelligence.
And one thing you mentioned that I think people grossly underestimate the power of is the tools like you have with respect to what particular skills will do and how do for you from a salary standpoint. And the reason that's important is because it then gets very easy to do the cost benefit analysis. If learning a particular skill is going to get you $10,000 more a year in salary, and you can take a course for $2,000 that is going to get you that skill, it's a pretty sure bet, right? I mean, there obviously are some nuances that'll play in there, but we'd like to call that kind of a skills or market arbitrage. For those who don't know, arbitrage being the business term related to kind of price discrepancies in a market and taking advantage of them. And that's a perfect example of how you can use arbitrage in your personal life to get a skill that will allow you to get financial benefits beyond what you spent to get that skill. A little outside the questions that we had talked about before, but I'm curious, what are the sorts of mistakes that people make that you see when it comes to trying to either communicate their skills or just more generally when it comes to approaching the job market? Because there's always people that you hear from in a really hot market will say, well, I've been looking for 1.5 years and it just hasn't worked out for me. What are the sorts of things that immediately come to your head when you hear that from folks?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to not assume that the employer can take from the resume all of the skills that you have. Employers really do struggle, and again, we study this problem in depth as part of what we do at Indeed. They struggle and they get wrong a lot what skills you might have based on past roles and responsibilities. And so, I think it's a mistake to not be a bit more intentional about how you convey the skills that you have and how you bring them to life. And that's not just about one artifact. That's also about, how individuals bring it to life in an interview or how they talk very specifically about skills. And honestly, it takes a little bit of reflection because maybe we're not all used to thinking about all of the skills that people amass over the course of their, student life and career. And even when you're just starting coming out of college or you're transitioning, into a full-time role for the first time, there are a lot of skills you've gained that are transferable, but people make the mistake of assuming if they're not the exact same thing in this context for this industry, it probably won't work. And so I also see, people taking themselves out of consideration for a role prematurely because they think a skill isn't transferable or it's a different industry, they wouldn't consider me, and actually they would have. Those are a couple of the things that I would call out.
Yeah, I think in my experience, you're right too, and I think it's also a great opportunity for a cover letter that takes the specific, not just a generic cover letter, but you're interested in a job X and really looking at the requirements for that job are and explaining clearly in a cover letter how the requirements for that job match the skills you have that might not just pop in a resume, to your point. And there's only so much you can say in a resume, and providing context, I think, matters just a ton.
Absolutely.
So what's a good place to start? So I mentioned earlier kind of a New Year's resolution. Maybe somebody's miserable in their job. Maybe they're just ready for a new opportunity and they want to kind of hit the pavement, the virtual pavement, and see what's out there. What's a good place to start if you're going to be looking for something new to do?
Yeah. So, I mean,